Stargate Voyager.
Well, I am super excited to be joined by JT follows JC in this interview. And we are going to get into all kinds of crazy topics like old world architecture, Tartaria, mud flood theories. We're going to jump into the Nephilim of old and portals. We got to talk about portals because, I mean, my handle name is Stargate Voyager. So if you know me, you know I love talking about portals. But JT, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing excellent, brother, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Hey, it's awesome. It was great to be on your show not too long ago. And man, you've just been crushing it on Instagram, on YouTube. Everybody, pull out your phones and follow at JT follows at JC if you like these interesting topics that we're going to get into. But man, you've been posting several videos lately about old world architecture and your theory of a cover-up regarding some call it Tartaria, mud flood. Again, you released a film called Ancient Angels that gets into the Nephilim topic. So I'm excited. We got a lot to talk about in a little bit of time, but I thought we'd start out just kind of tell our listeners, our viewers, a little bit about you. How'd you get into these topics? Did it start at a young age, or was it just the last few years? What led you to this journey of pumping out all this content on these topics, many that delve into the ancient world?
Well, yeah. So it's funny that I hadn't, I'm what someone would call as a conspiracy theorist or a truther, at whatever label you want. But I think 2020, like a lot of people, was the year that really woke me up. Obviously there was signs of maybe the awakening before that, but like that was the year that, most people either they woke up around 9/11, 2001, or they woke up around somewhere around, in 2020, and I'm the latter. And so when I did wake up, I started to notice all the kinds of craziness in the times and just weird stuff. And at one point I felt like compelled through my faith to like start talking a little bit on social media, just things that I felt like exposing truth and things like that. So I got a TikTok account. My brother encouraged me to get on there, and I thought, why would I ever do that? Like, that's for like 13-year-old girls dancing. But then he was sharing videos about like the Illuminati and all these conspiracies. I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And at one point I was like, I saw there was a weird statue in front of the UN. I don't know if you remember, this was a couple years ago. And it looked almost like straight out of the book of Daniel. It was like a beast statue. It was like a lion that had, or like a lion, tiger, leopard thing with wings. And everyone's like, oh, that's straight out of Daniel. So I made a video about that. And then so at that point, I kind of like, with 3 followers, I had 10,000 views on that video. Before you know it, I had 1,000 followers. I did a little series on that stuff. And before you know it, I had a video that had like 1 million views. And then it was like, well, I guess I'm doing this. And at that point I was researching lots of things, and everything that I basically thought was interesting, I started to make a video about it. And basically, yeah. So like you go down the rabbit hole, and then I haven't got out of the rabbit hole since then. So it's been about 3 years ago. And before you know it, like we were talking off air about like, it's like your own curiosity kind of leads you in certain places. And like I had no idea I was getting to old world stuff. But the fascinating part is, before I woke up, maybe the first conspiracy I was really kind of interested in was like ancient aliens. Like as a Christian guy, I didn't really believe the alien stuff, but it was the megaliths. So obviously that's one of the reasons I liked your content. I was like, anything about megaliths is just like, this is so weird. It's so weird that we were never told about any of this stuff. And a lot of people knew about like the Great Pyramids, the Giza Plateau, or at least we've seen pictures of it, but we still don't even know how impressive it is until you see shows that are detailing like how many stones, how big they are, and all. And then that kind of mystery really was like, wow. And then like guys like you find out it's all around the whole world. And you're like, wait a minute. Now this is really weird. Like all these pyramids everywhere. We're only told about Egypt and then maybe Mexico, but then there's like, you find evidence of this stuff everywhere. And I think at that point I was like, wow, like, so the mainstream, like, explanation for this stuff doesn't make sense to me. So then that was the first part. I was like, well, I don't believe that. And then you get to like 2020 and then you're like, well, I don't believe anything they say now. So then you go research these topics on your own. And as a Christian guy, I wanted a Christian explanation for the pyramids because I do think that's important. I think it's important that like if certain people are dating these things back 26,000 years and things that seem contradictory to the Bible, I would want some answers. If people are saying aliens did it, like what is the Christian to do with that? Until I said I discovered Genesis 6, if these ancient people were talking about gods and giants, well, Genesis 6 talks about gods and giants. It talks about the sons of God. It talks about the Nephilim, the heroes of old, the men of renown. And then you go into the book of Enoch. They talk about the watchers teaching men technology. Okay, so is that possibly the technology that could create things we can't explain? I think it makes a lot of sense. And then you get to today, and I said, it's funny how like the same curiosity has got me to this old world stuff where you're like, wait a minute. So we're busy looking at things that are, potentially thousands of years old, maybe almost 10,000 years old. But what about these things that are in almost every town in America? And you're like, that's really weird. They don't build them like that anymore. And you start asking questions about that stuff. And I think that's like when you get into like the mud flood, Tartaria, everybody, like that's kind of a catch-all phrase for it. But yeah, like are certain buildings evidence of a cover-up?
Very interesting. So it sounds like your brother gets some of the credit for kind of bringing you down the rabbit hole. Are you and your brother still pretty close?
Yeah, we are. It's funny because like, how it goes. It's like we're both passionate about the things we believe in. It's like we don't agree about everything anymore. But I remember when he was first exposing me to certain conspiracies, and I was like, no way. Because of course I was like asleep then. I was still pursuing like all the things that they tell you to want in this world. And I just thought like, that doesn't fit in with what I'm doing. Like, I don't need, it's kind of like that. Yeah. People don't want to know certain conspiracies. And then once you kind of realize, like you start accepting them. Yeah. But he definitely was kind of showing me the symbolism and things. And I started to understand like that whole, like what Manly P. Hall, the famous Freemason, was saying, that symbols are the language of the mysteries. And it's kind of like that. When you start to understand the symbolism, you start to understand the language of the people from not just today, but thousands of years ago. And like, there's this code, and it is almost like the Matrix when like Neo, when he finally can see, he's like, he literally can see the zeros and the ones and all. You're like, okay, now I see past what they want you to see. And I guess a lot of times I don't have answers. I think I'm one of these people. I'd like to say that I'm curious and I try to be intellectually honest, where I say, I don't have, I'm not going to be able to answer everyone's questions, but I'll just have more questions, like,
right.
Or I'll be skeptical of answers.
You're a critical thinker. Well, your brother's probably got to be pretty impressed, man, with where you've grown your platform now. And so then it sounds like 2020 really awakened you and awakened so many around the world. And some of what you shared reminds me of, I guess, my first awakening to ancient history back in like 2012. And I've shared this when asked, how did you go down the rabbit hole with history? I'll never forget that one day, again, around 2012, I was always into ancient history, always intrigued, like you, always knew there was probably more. But I remember sitting there doing a search for ancient architecture. All these images pop up, and there is a wall of Sacsayhuaman in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember zooming into the screen going, what am I looking at? And I'm thinking immediately, how have I never seen this before in my life? What is going on? This is so superior to any Inca, all the Inca stuff I'd seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, that led me down deeper and deeper into realizing there was, I believe, a far older civilization that built this. And then you learn that the mainstream says, no, the Inca built it. And then you ask the $1 million question, well, why are they telling us that? So you do this awakening, you start these channels, social media, and it sounds like you're on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all the places, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I got a Rumble channel too. Like I've tried to diversify, I think I started making podcasts. So like I'm on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but like, the best place to to see some of the stuff that I'm talking about. Like I was telling you before, I started with making very short videos, and now I've started to make, after we made Ancient Angels, we started to make more podcasts and long form stuff, and then so then the reels are kind of a byproduct, unless it's something that's super hot and it's like you just grab my phone in my car and just start talking about it and just make a quick reel. But yeah, typically I want to talk more about it because like the reels are supposed to get people curious about the things that you're talking about, right?
Well, as a content creator, you find out real fast how much time editing takes, right?
Right, for sure.
The magical word is, how can I repurpose what I've already done in short form? Because it's crazy. Again, if you have even a slight perfectionist mindset like I do, how long a stinking 1-minute video can take to create when you add music, edit out all the ahs and ums, add the captions, add your overlays. Dude, it can take an hour plus.
Definitely. Well, I mean, I think that, some people ask me sometimes because like they've asked me like who edits my videos, and I'm like, I do. And then they're like, do you use like an AI program? I'm like, no, I edit them, I cut them, I clip them, and I make them exactly like they are. And I know there's programs to do it, but it's like, but once you start doing it, I'm sure like you're like me, where like the AI is never going to do it as good as you do it, because you know exactly what you want to say and you want exactly how it's supposed to look. So you're not going to be okay with it being, that's fine.
It's just, I can't imagine relinquishing that to AI and just hoping it turns out. There's no way it could, based on what's in my head, or even farming it out to someone. But so let's get into talking about old world architecture, Tartaria, mud flood. So for people that may not know anything about this topic, start out giving us like a 10,000 foot, 30,000 foot view of this topic and what it means when you say Tartaria, mud flood. And then I want to get into asking you about several specific sites that you have made videos about, and we'll just go deep into this crazy world of old world architecture.
Yeah, so basically Tartaria, well, the interesting parts about Tartaria is it literally was an empire that's like, for some reason, they never told us about. Now, some people will project that onto every old world, like very impressive building, like stone building in like major cities. And so they'll say that's evidence of this civilization. It's called Tartaria and it's everywhere. Well, that's not exactly correct. I think that what Tartaria was, like I said, is actually like was in Russia, like modern day Russia. That's where this empire was. Now, it's interesting, like, good question is like, why don't they tell us about that? But if you see old maps, it's funny, even I got this map behind me up over here. It actually, Tartaria is on it. Places like Tartaria and like Hyperborea, like these are on old maps. And it's like, so the question is, why is it on there? But what a lot of people attribute to like these very impressive buildings, kind of almost like good examples of this would be like Washington, D.C. Like, oh, that's weird. They built that place like Rome. That's kind of interesting. And you see all these massive stone buildings. Like, wow. So then in this time, in like the 1800s, they built very, very impressive things with not a lot of technology. And so I think that some people have asked questions about that. And then you start to look in the timeline of when these buildings were built, and you're like, some of these buildings were built like in a year. And we're supposed to believe that the people with like horses and buggies, like literally went to the quarry, got all the stones. They carved these things with the hand, by hand with chisels, and everything's perfect. And it's like, it's more impressive than the things we make now. It's like I said, it's very similar in the way that like they would try to say that the stuff in Egypt was done with copper tools. And you're like, well, no, I don't see that. Like, you know what I mean? So like, it's almost like, well, this is all they had, so this is what they used. And you're like, no, there's a third option. We don't know what they did. And I think in the same way that we ask questions about this, where like the timeline makes no sense of when some of these buildings were done. So, and there's evidence that very similar architecture, very in the same kind of way that you could say there's pyramids all over the place. That speaks to a worldwide civilization, a connectivity that we weren't told about. I mean, that's what makes sense to most. And in the same way, there's buildings that what you would consider maybe old world, or maybe even some people would say they're colonial style. And they're in places like Japan and China and India, and places they don't really belong. Like we have in our minds a certain type of architecture that's in these places, but no, that literally this kind of like Roman-esque Greek style is everywhere in the whole world. And so some people have theorized like that, yeah, there is this cover up of this civilization that was likely very advanced, more advanced than we are, that was in our recent past. And then some people question like when did this empire, whatever it was, or whatever this civilization was, when did it fall? And that's when people say around maybe like the late 18th century, maybe early 19th century, there's people call something the mud flood. And if you guys aren't sure what that is, there's things buried around the whole world. And I'm sure Derek can speak to this, where it's not just ancient stuff, it's modern stuff, where like modern cities have all kinds of evidence that their buildings are buried up. Like the first floors of lots of buildings are buried. Like literally you go to like a major city and you'll see windows, like if a road's kind of on a slant, built on a slant, the building's on a slant, the windows disappear. No, like nobody would build the building like that. The street literally starts to cover up the windows. Or like every kind of old world building has like stairs up to the first floor. But what it seems obvious when you actually can see it, that's not the first floor. That's like likely the second floor, because the first floor is underground. So like you have these first floors that are almost halfway basements, but they're really not. And that's like a good example is like my hometown. I'm near Norfolk, Virginia. It's 7 feet over sea level. They don't build basements around here because they would flood. I mean, because the place floods like crazy. But if you go downtown and you'll find basements, but they're not really basements, all over the place there. And so like what do you do with that? So why would they do that when they had less technology, build basements? Did they not know it flooded back then? Or maybe the conditions were different. And then, so then you see that in modern examples, but like when you see like the Moai statues in Easter Island, you know, it wasn't almost until recently they were like, hey, guess what? They have bodies. Well, yeah, they have bodies. Like they're buried like 20 feet under the ground in some cases. With their statue, what's that once famous gate in Iraq? There's a picture from like 1850 where it's like the gate was like the gate's like it's got those cherub looking things with the beard, you know, and
Right.
The gate is like 25 feet tall. And like literally they show it and it's 100% buried under the ground. And the Roman ruins, places in Rome, they're all buried. And the thing is, it's like, this is a worldwide phenomenon. And I don't necessarily have answers for it. We got our theories on what that means, but I just think it's insane that there's really no narrative like how all these things got buried. Like that people don't understand, like when Roman ruins had to be excavated, like even the biblical cities, like in like the book of Revelation, all the cities in Turkey, like when they say there was excavations to find ruins, like literally there's like Sardis, Turkey, there's a real famous picture where they had dug 20 feet under the ground and there's like this massive column under there. Okay, so how did that happen? And so all that being said, there's lots of questions about that. And then so we continue to ask questions. And I think the more you kind of like start pulling at that thread of the sweater, it reeks of a cover up. We're told that the camera was invented like around 1820-ish, I think. But the earliest pictures we have of like big cities, like specifically like in Europe, there's a lot of good pictures of like St. Petersburg in Russia. There's like Dresden in Germany, and you have these massive cities, and there's nobody on the streets. There's mud everywhere, which, you know, I think a lot of people would probably say, well, they didn't have paved roads. It's like, yes, they did. I mean, look at the buildings. They weren't walking around in mud and walking into some immaculate building. It's like, it makes no sense. So then you're like, so what happened there? It looks very eerie when you see these pictures. So I don't know. It seems like people have kind of theorized like that when you hear about all these places being founded in a certain time or buildings being founded, it's like, is that literally just kind of almost like a tongue in cheek? Like, yeah, well, they found this building at some point, and then maybe somebody claimed it. They uncovered some of it, and maybe people took credit for things that they didn't actually build.
You had a video, a short, or I don't know if it was a short, but it was a video on Instagram I saw where you're talking a lot about this. It's 1850s, the 1850 massive buildings. And you talk about how in a lot of these photos, there's little to barely any people in them, like you said. but then talk about the orphan connection, because in this video you break down how you see photos of hundreds of thousands of orphans, or you give stats of there was hundreds of thousands of orphans back then. Yet there was also hundreds of thousands of adults in an insane asylum
Yeah.
in these crazy looking buildings.
Okay, so the overall theory is like that I came up with was there was some kind of cataclysm. Was it man-made? Was it act of God back then? And it seemed like there was some kind of a reset. And that's what people would just say. There was some kind of reset back in the early 19th century, maybe late 18th century. And so what's interesting, again, you think about like 1776. There's the revolution in America, there's a revolution in France right after that time. There's wars all over the place around this time. Like the 1800s was like the craziest time like in the whole world. Like every major city was on fire. There's all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's what I was saying. So when you see these pictures, and there's lots of them, of just like these cities that just look completely just uninhabited. Like you couldn't take a picture of like a major city like that and there'd be no people on it. Like, what do they tell everyone to stay inside? Now, some people will say, oh, that's because of exposure. No. That wasn't because of exposure, because if there was people walking around, there'd be little blurs. But there's not. It almost feels like that the picture was taken with some intent to show this is crazy. Check out this city. There's nobody in it. And then so shortly after that, there's a story of the orphan trains. So I believe in America, it was like from like 1860 to 1929. There's 250,000 kids going on orphan trains. Like this, like I said, this is when you go down the rabbit hole and you're like, that is the weirdest thing. Because I've heard people make videos about that, and I said, there's no way that could be true. That doesn't make sense to me. Like 250,000 kids. So you got to think about it. We're told worldwide there was 1 billion people in 1800, like worldwide. So you think about 250,000 around that time, multiply that number by about 12, and that would maybe be equivalent to what it would be like today. Like, you could only even imagine that many kids who have no parents and they're just being shipped around the country. And this is just in the United States. So I believe this is a worldwide phenomenon too. So my question was, like, you start to see no people in certain pictures. Then later on, you start to see people, like cities like Paris and London, and everybody you've seen in these pictures, it looks like people are tourists. They're all dressed like aristocrats. Everybody's dressed to the nines. They got top hats, they got canes. The women are all dressed up in their big dresses. And so who's working in the factories? Not those people. Who's working in the fields? I don't think that those people are working in the fields or the factories. So who's doing all these jobs that they would need people to do? And I believe that's where the orphans came in. So you have all these orphans getting shipped around, and then you start to see at the same time, you start seeing these crazy pictures of like kids working in factories and working in fields, like kids that are working big machinery in factories that they don't seem big enough to even operate. Like, they're standing on boxes to do things. And, I'm sure some people would say, oh, well, that's because they didn't have child labor laws. Of course they didn't. But I don't think that if you're trying to make money, I get it. You could pay a kid less. But a kid is not producing like a man could, right? Like, I mean, you'd have to babysit the kids too, basically. It's like you can't they just turn them loose in the factory? Like, that's not efficient by any means. But the crazy thing is, like, so the question is, so where did these kids come from? Well, you could say there's wars going on at the time. There is. You could also say that there's fires happening in these cities. Sure. But also at the very same time, they're from, I want to say in 1900, there was 150,000 people in insane asylums in America. And people are getting locked up for stuff like religious extremism and very weird things. They're just being put into nut houses. And so I started to theorize, maybe those are the parents. Those kids were taken away from these parents and they were put into, basically the workforce. And I believe those kids are the first ones who are basically getting taught, like, in the modern school system, and they were getting taught a false history, and they're not allowed to talk about what happened before. And I think maybe the people who did talk about what happened before, maybe those are the people in the nut houses who got their kids taken away. so they can't actually tell you what actually happened. And I'm sure you know, Derek, that when you start to try to find old books, it's not easy to find old books, like books before 1850. And when you do find them, there's weird stuff in them. Like there's lots of there's weird anomalies that we're not taught about. And I think that, again, it reeks of a cover up. There's also evidence in like these fairs, like, well, you have the world fairs. Before you get into that, like places like Coney Island, they have these weird exhibits with like incubator babies. And it's like, what is going on? Like, you have like the ads for like Cabbage Patch Kids and stuff like that. And you're like, I don't know what to do with this. It seems like if you don't look into it, you would say there's no merit to any of it, but there is. Like, there was a weird time happening, and the real question is why. We're not really taught why. Like, if you see like a famous old picture of like St. Petersburg, it's as big as it is today. Like these cities, these major cities all around the world, when you see early pictures of them, they're as big as they are today. And so these places don't look like they're on the rise. They just look like they've got tons of infrastructure there that are built for cities that could have millions of people in them. But there's obviously not millions of people, or at least I don't believe that there was. And so the buildings were repurposed later to do other things. That's why it's funny, like we were saying, that you have in America back in those days, there was thousands of orphanages. Like there's like the orphanages as we knew it then don't exist. Obviously, we know that there's ways for kids to be adopted and stuff like that, but that's not like wholesale orphanages where these places literally look like castles in America. Same thing where you have insane asylums that look like castles. Then you even have prisons that look like castles all around the country. And so just knowing like how things are now, why don't we build things that look like castles anymore? we don't. And it's like the idea that we ever did, like you would ever build a castle and then decide to turn it into a prison or an insane asylum. Again, so we don't really have insane asylums anymore. They don't exist anymore. Orphanages like those don't exist anymore.
I had never really thought about it, but you got my brain spinning there, thinking about the insane asylums and how, today, I mean, obviously there's, mental disorders are real and, it's all over, but we don't see insane asylums today like you were showing in these photographs and the stats that you shared. Again, from the 1800s, didn't you say it was hundreds of thousands of people, if that's accurate, in these insane asylums?
It was in the year 1900, there was 150,000 people in insane asylums in America. And now there's zero. So like that's you know what I mean? Like that seems like a big, like if we went from that to that, I mean, that seems like a pretty drastic. It's funny too, when you think about the way things supposedly used to be, the way we're taught things were. You would have thought back then, this is the beginning of America, right? The land of the free. Well, I mean, when would we ever just allow people just to be locked up because they were religious extremists and stuff like that? It's like, I thought that was part of the First Amendment. Like, do you get a court to sign off and this person's crazy enough to just to take all the rights away? Like, that seems like I don't know, that seems kind of messed up. And you just, like, we're taught a certain way about how this place grew. But when you actually, like I said, when you actually start to examine some of it, it really just makes no sense. Again, like that, you think about a lot of these buildings are like public buildings. But we're told that in this country, they threw tea in a harbor because they didn't want to pay taxes anymore. But then who funded all these public buildings that are all over the place? Like a lot of these buildings were created before there was like income tax and stuff like that in these places. So who, right, who was investing all the time and the money into building a very elaborate, detailed, beautiful building, and in order to take people, you take their rights away and shove them into these places, not criminals, people they deemed insane. By who?
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying they weren't in the insane asylums necessarily because of mental disorders or drugs or whatever. It might have been a more nefarious system of lawfare that was just condemning these people to their fate, right?
Well, yeah, possibly. The question is like, so some people would ask, like, how could some of these things that I'm saying, how could they be true without people saying it? Well, that's pretty good reason that you could do it.
Mhm.
It's like, you imagine if, you think about like World War II era in Germany. Well, how come nobody spoke up about that thing? It's like, because their neighbors spoke up about it, and you know what happened to them? Nobody heard from them again.
Mhm.
And so, like, what incentive it is, and it's like, it's not like we're on the, they didn't have the internet back then. At least I don't think so. So, like, if something happened to your neighbor, it's like, who are you even gonna go tell? You can't tell the state. I mean, if the state is the one who's doing some of these things, like, what are you supposed to do?
Let's talk about some of this World Fair architecture and photos. You mentioned the World Fair and some of the anomalies with it. I've seen some of the videos you made and photos. What's going on with these old World Fairs?
I think that's some of the pictures. I think they're explained as like these things were just pop-up events, like almost in the similar way that, okay, so if Chicago, like big cities like Chicago, Philadelphia, St. Louis, San Francisco, they'll have these things called world fairs or international fairs, or even some of them are like centennial celebrations of like America and all this kind of stuff. And we're told it was kind of like the Olympics, where they would get these fairs to these certain cities, and they would build all this infrastructure for people to come for like a year, like, through most of the year, and they'd come visit these places. Like literally a place like Chicago, they said there was like millions of visitors, millions. Okay, so again, this is 1893. Is, I guess, they had the Columbia exhibition in Chicago, and if you guys have seen these pictures, it looks like what you'd imagine Rome in all its glory. It's like the most epic looking places. They got Roman looking statues. The buildings are huge. So we're told in I think it was 1876, I guess was the 100 years of America. They had a World Fair in Philadelphia. They built the biggest building in the whole world for this fair. 20 acres is like the size of this building. Well, we're told that all this stuff was temporary. So like they built these crazy things and then they just tore them down. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Again, we're talking about a people that should have less tools to do this kind of stuff. They don't have the heavy equipment to do it. So they're going to build these very elaborate buildings. Like, and when you see them, they are very elaborate. They are very massive, like columns, very detailed stone work. They'll claim, some of the people who are saying that these are temporary, they'll say, oh, it's just plaster. What's funny enough is that I'm in construction. My family's been in construction for a long time. Even if they were temporary by their definition, they would say, oh, well, they're only made of like wood and plaster and metal lath and this. And I'm like, do you know that's what they make stuff of now? Like, those are not temporary structures they make now. It's like the only reason you say they're temporary is because supposedly they tore them down afterwards. But like, you don't build a building that's as big as the ones we're talking about. And then you have millions of people going in and out of these places in order for them to be temporary. And if they were temporary, they would still have to be strong enough to not fall down. Plaster back in those days would have been a cement-based plaster, right? So it's still really heavy. And what you'd had to have to support all that weight, steel frames. So even if they weren't stone, they would not be temporary. They would not technically be still. I mean, like I said, they would only be temporary because if you decided to destroy it later, but not temporary like, this is not like a Hollywood set. This is not something that you could just walk behind. There's nothing there. There's pictures from the inside of these places too. And yes, they have steel frames. These buildings look like they're made of stone. And not only that, they have age. So they built the biggest building in the whole world in Philadelphia in 1876. They tore it down afterwards. So in 1893, Chicago built a building that was almost twice as big, or it might even twice. I think actually they might have said it was 44 acres on the inside. And then they tore it down afterwards. Okay, so we're taught like a certain view of how they would have lived back then. Like, we're supposed to be like the advanced people, but we could not comprehend doing that. I don't think anybody could. Like, who would put that much effort in? And these exhibitions had like 200 buildings for these things. So we're just talking about like examples of them. They're all over the place. There is a real good example, and I read this. If you guys have ever seen John Levi, he makes good content on YouTube, and he exposes a lot of the old world stuff. He did a good video about San Francisco, And so they had a midwinter fair there, and I think it was might be 1894. Well, there's evidence that there was actually, this was a yearly thing they did there, because there was a newspaper article from 1893 saying that they were advertising for this thing, and we're told that they just built this thing like in 6 months. He breaks down all the costs it would cost, and again, not only that, guys, that we're told electricity was brand new in these places. The whole places were lit up. We're told like people like Tesla would have just had him and a couple of helpers, and they would have wired every one of these buildings. Like you see the pictures of Chicago, it's all lit up. Pictures of San Francisco, it's all lit up. You know what I'm saying? Like, does that make sense to anybody else? I mean, because it doesn't make sense to me that, and especially if you could make a place look like that. Because when you see the pictures of Chicago, you're thinking like, if you could make it look like that temporarily, why wouldn't you make it look like that permanently? Because it looks awesome. So like, you know, so yeah. What's the rub? I think to me, maybe it was possible that they put on these expos or these fairs before they decided to destroy some certain of these structures. The funny part is in Chicago and also in San Francisco, they say that these buildings were temporary, but sometimes they didn't destroy them and they find out they're actually made of stone. You know, like I think there's a famous museum of arts museum in Chicago that was supposedly built for this expo, but it's not made of temporary materials. It's made of stone. Like the rest of them look like they are.
So you're theorizing that possibly they weren't made for these world fairs in this crazy little amount of time. They were already there. The fairs just said they were built in a crazy amount of time, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's evidence on old maps that places like San Francisco, we're told that San Francisco wasn't even discovered until like the 1870s, or no, the 1770s by like the Spanish. But you see, there's actually a map from, I think, in the 1500s that San Francisco is on the map. You know, Chicago, there's a place called Chilaga that's over in that area. And so we're told like both those cities didn't become cities like we know them until like the mid 1800s. So why would those things ever been on the map if not for something there? Like San Francisco is probably one of the best examples of it. And I think most of the West Coast cities are really good examples because we're taught like that Lewis and Clark didn't even go across the Mississippi until like 1803. From like 1803 to 1806, they go exploring what's west. And can you only even imagine like how crazy that sounds? Like, can you imagine saying, Derek, I want you to go across the Mississippi, and like what we're taught about like what America must have looked like back then. Just go look for stuff. Like as vast as this country is, with forests and all this stuff, it's like you can imagine like what really. And then that was the beginning of the 1800s, and so by the middle, you have a city like Chicago that looks like it does today. San Francisco looks like it does today. What? Because there's a gold rush. Well, it's funny because San Francisco is like, that's where they always talk about the 49ers, that they went over there, but it's like 50 miles from like any real like place you would actually try to find gold. It does, like I said, the timeline does not make sense in what we would have known, because I don't think that, like I said, with any kind of examination, it's like, really? So we're taught like cowboys just went out to these places? Okay, so if that was the case, who did all the central planning and laid these cities out like that they are now? Built underground parts of these cities. Where did they get all the stone and the brick to do all this stuff? Because they wouldn't have the factories when the first people were going out there. But yet all these places are... Yeah, I think Chicago, or was it San Francisco? This is how crazy it is. They say between like 1830s, or maybe 1840 and like, I want to say like 1890, it had 6 major fires and 1 earthquake, one major earthquake, where the place had to be rebuilt over and over again. Those were some resilient people, that's for sure.
Let's talk about Fort Jefferson. You put out a video of this recently that was very insightful. It's this interesting looking star fort, 75 miles off the coast of Florida. Tell us about the anomalies surrounding it and why you think there's more to its history than we've been told.
Here's the conventional story of it. I think there was something called, after the War of 1812, they had these I think the first and second and third systems to like protect the country. So they were saying like there was issues with the British attacking the coast during those times. So they were making certain types of fortifications. So in the third system, supposedly, they built 42 forts. It was funny. I was actually just reading up on it to refresh myself on it. Congress designated like $800,000 to build all these forts. 42 forts. Okay. Now here's the crazy part is when you actually look into these places, Fort Jefferson is the one that I remember talking to my dad. My dad was always real skeptical of any of the conspiracies I talked about with him. But when I told him about this one, it was really like I could just see the gears turn in his mind. Okay, so here's some of the facts about this place. It's about 70-ish miles off the coast. I think it might be 70 miles from Key West. So it's on the Gulf side of Florida. And it's on this place called, I guess it's called Dry Tortugas. It's these little islands. What it really looks like is like little sandbars. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot there. And like this fort is over there. Yeah, and you said it's a star fort. It's built like where it encompasses like this whole island. It's almost like the edges of the fort are literally at the edge of the water. And there's 16 million bricks in this place.
Wow.
16 million. And that makes it the largest masonry brick structure in the whole Western Hemisphere. What we're told is that this was built, they built some lighthouse in, I think, the 1820s, but in 1846, they started building this fort, and it took them around, they say it took 30 years to construct. Okay, so you could imagine this. Again, like this is times where like you think wooden ships. Think Pirates of the Caribbean. Like if that's your picture in your mind. They're taking pallets and pallets of bricks. And back then, I don't even believe they had like full capacity to have factories that made bricks. I think they still had to make them mostly by hand. There's 16 million bricks. And here's the interesting part about this island. There's no fresh water there. It seems like, to me, this is me, a skeptical person. It seems like an odd place because if you were trying to make a fortification that would have any kind of help for the British, you might want to put it like maybe on the other, closer to the coast. Maybe put it like, I don't know, on the other side where the British are coming from the other way. It's kind of like between like Key West and like Cuba. And they say this, of course, this fort was never attacked. Of course, why would it be? Like, why would you even want to take this place? It's just like you said, it's literally like a sandbar with no fresh water. We're told is that they had cisterns and it rained a lot there, so they just got fresh water from the rain. Well, that seems very difficult to build stuff like that, masonry, with no fresh water. Like, can you imagine like doing masonry? Don't you have to wash stuff off? They go down to the ocean to wash off their tools all the time. It's preposterous. I mean, that's all I can say. Is when you actually think about this, like how much time and effort would go into this? Again, it wasn't the biggest masonry structure in the Western Hemisphere then. It still is. So we're taught is that they took them about 30 years to build this. Like toward the end of it, like during the Civil War, they decided to turn it into a prison, even though it supposedly wasn't done. And then shortly after, actually before it was completed, the United States Army abandoned it. Like I think they said they started building it in 1846. It was abandoned by the Army in 1874.
Wow.
And so basically what we're taught it was used for, it was really never used for that. Supposedly it was like maybe there was a harbor there. Well, not a harbor, but they would be a place where like ships would get, I don't know, they get supplies there, even though I don't know why you'd get supplies there since they couldn't make anything there. Like literally the place is, I think it encompasses 26 acres. It makes no logical sense. I don't think so.
26 acres. You're saying it took 30 years to build?
We're taught that it took 30 years to build, but they also but once it was completed, they didn't really ever use it for the things they said they were going to use it for.
Yeah, to me, that's the biggest alarm that goes off in my head is, in back in the day, it would have cost a huge amount to build this. 30 years later, they're going to abandon it because it's, it doesn't have much purpose.
because it makes no sense to have this place out on a sandbar, like I said, with no fresh water. It really, and here's another ridiculous thing they say. They say that they used slave labor to build it, slave labor and prisoners to build this thing. But then when you actually look at the detail of the brickwork, these guys were obviously master masons. There's arches everywhere. The not only that, but the brick style. I guess there's three different types of brick. Basically techniques how you'd build brick. They use obviously the hardest one, and it's perfect. Like these structures like this are perfect. It makes sense to me that this is a cover story. This place was already there because some people have said, and I'm not necessarily married to any one of these theories, but some people have said, what if where it's at, it's on some sandbar? What if, it's interesting that what they call it, the Bimini Road is underwater around Florida. Some people say that's some kind of evidence of Atlantis. I don't really buy that, but it's interesting that there's something that looks like a man-made structure under the water. What if that place was not so far off the coast back in those days? Because it really makes no sense to put that where it's at if geographically the things are still the same. I think there's something amiss. Like, what is it? I'm not sure.
The structure is clearly not of the megalithic, flavor, but it is a massive undertaking with, like you said, detailed arches, elaborate arches. But so you're saying it might be older than when they're telling us it was built. How much older do you think it might be? Are we talking like a couple hundred years, 1,000 years? Any ideas on that?
That's a great question. There's just older. I mean, I guess we don't know. That's what I'm saying. I guess I don't know. It's funny. That's what I was saying. Like that, I'm sure in the field of research you do, you'll see like stuff like Baalbek, and you'll say, well, that one stone is huge and those don't really line up with the other ones. So like this probably was done earlier. These smaller stones were likely done later. Yeah. So this doesn't really line up with that because it's stuff that we could do. Like I think like we would say like some of those megaliths and like, we're saying in Peru, we'd say, I don't think we could do that now. I'm sure we could do something like Fort Jefferson now, I believe. Why would we? We wouldn't. So the real question is like there had to be some kind of a different condition. Something was different about then that it was practical to do it. And I think that the interesting part is, as I mentioned, San Francisco, there's also called Fort Point in San Francisco. And it's right under like basically where the Golden Gate Bridge is. Very similar. And it was supposedly built in like 1850. Again, I think in 1848, there were supposedly like 1,000 people in San Francisco. So they built this fort there, and supposedly this is all based on like they were trying to fortify the United States coast. They picked San Francisco, which again would have been a mining town back then. Like why they would put that there makes no sense. Very similar in the way that it's 3 stories tall. It's got I don't know the exact brick count, but it's a similar structure. The walls are 7 feet thick. Right? 7 feet thick. There's another place, I think it's called Fort Morgan in Alabama. And so the funny part is these places were told to be like these, the way they're laid out like stars is supposedly because they could put like cannons and there would be no blind spots where this fort could be attacked. Well, the funny part is if you actually look at like the military history of these forts, they didn't do well in combat. So what they're all, the whole purpose is if they are get attacked, again, like nobody's attacking the fort in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. It's easily avoidable. It's 70 miles off the coast. So it's kind of like if a ship would say like,
go around it.
I'm going to go. You got a lot of leeway to go around it on either side.
Now, if it could move, that would be one thing.
Right. If it was like a Death Star, maybe, but like, it's like the Death Star, which is just hanging out in nowhere. And it's like, let's just not go that part of the Star Wars universe. But this is kind of like in that same way. So why would there's no strategic value of this place other than maybe some people have theorized, oh, well, it's used to stop pirates or something. But again, pirates probably could go around it easily. And it's really the ships that are patrolling the area would be, I don't know, the main deterrent for that kind of thing, I guess. But the real question is so these structures are likely older. And here's something that, again, I read out of that guy John Levi's book. So as I mentioned, I'm kind of in southeastern Virginia. And so we have here, really close to where I'm at, is Jamestown. And if you guys aren't familiar, Jamestown is we're told, is the oldest permanent English settlement. But just south of here is Roanoke Island, and so Roanoke Island is where we get the whole mythology of the lost colony, where they established this colony there before Jamestown, I think in like the 1840s, and then I'm not sure how long they were there, but John White was the man who was kind of in charge there. He went back to Great Britain to get supplies, and I guess he came back 3 years later. Kind of took a long time to get there and go back, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. But the interesting part about John White is he did these detailed maps of the area, like pretty accurate, like the way where they're drawn. And so he's got this map of the area from 1840. What's fascinating is there's a patch over part of the map, and I guess they did like what is it called, like LiDAR type technique to find out what was under the patch. And what's under the patch is a star. It looks like what's been covered up is a star fort. Okay, so now think about that. So before the first permanent English settlement, there's a map by John White of North Carolina where I guess it's like right where these rivers fork. There is a patch, and under the patch is a star fort. So like a similar structure possibly as the ones we're talking about. Maybe it seems to me that they were already here. So that's in the 1500s. So
any theories you want to share with us about what happened at Roanoke?
Well, I mean, before I started to go down this path, I started to think, like, what if it, like the Native Americans always talk about giants and stuff. And I thought, well, what if the lost colony was eaten by cannibalistic giants? I guess that's possible, but I'm starting to wonder how much of the stuff we've been taught about this, if any of it's true. Because again, if there was this advanced civilization that was possibly already here, like what were we told about the things that were like, what are they correct about the things they're telling us? Because it's funny, even like when I was going to school, like in like grade school and stuff, everyone talked about Columbus being the first person to discover America, but there was always people saying, yeah, but the Vikings got here before he did. So even back in those days, it would almost be like the teacher would kind of say, a lot of people think the Vikings were here first. Now it's widely accepted that's true. Okay, so why were they ever pushing this false history? Because there was probably lots of information that was not true. So if they lied about that, I believe they lied about the whole idea of why was America named America. Amerigana Vespucci, literally they named it after some guy's first name, not even the first guy to come here. And again, you don't really discover a place that already exists. Like there's people everywhere, right? I think that I remember hearing Tim Alberino back in the day, and he discussed the idea that no, America was named after Amaru Ka, the plumed serpent. He was what they called him in what we now call South America. He was their god, and of course he was their in Quetzalcoatl in North America. I think there's a lot of things about what we've been taught about this place just are not so. Like now I'm trying to peel back the layers, like how much could we have been lied to about that? But I mean, again, you didn't discover a place that has massive pyramids and people that actually have a civilization there. It's like, it's not, like what we're taught. And then we're supposed to believe that Columbus thought this was India. And then he started calling everyone Indians. And then so one day, I guess they figured out it was not India, but they still called them Indians after that. You know what I mean? Like there's one of those kind of things where you're like, we were taught a lot of dumb things, like Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity by flying a kite with a key on it. Isaac Newton discovered gravity by getting hit on the head with an apple. Like, it's almost like, wow, they taught us as kids, like mythologies basically that probably aren't true, in order to craft this narrative about you have this progression between colonization and then we improved and eventually you get to the Industrial Revolution. And then you have like the robber barons in this country and they're credited with building everything. Like the Freemasons are credited with building all these places, but it's like, you ever seen a Freemasonry lodge now? A recent one? They don't look like anything impressive. They don't look like they have much masonry skills.
It's funny you say that. Where I live, about 45 minutes out of Seattle, in a smaller town it's growing because everyone's leaving the cities and coming out
Hmm.
to the country. So it's good and bad. But the little masonry lodge where the masons meet is probably the worst, ugliest building in the whole town. And in the other towns around it, it's the same thing. It's almost like this little windowless building. It's crazy. I was in Europe over the summer on our Mysteries of England tour to see Stonehenge and the ancient sites. But still, even touring through London, and we went to Paris, you see what looks like old world architecture, right?
Hmm.
Some massive buildings. There was a cathedral in
Yes, the
Salisbury.
cathedrals.
There was a cathedral in Salisbury, England.
Hmm.
It's a really cool town. It's not the biggest town, and I don't think this is even the biggest cathedral. Now, I'm there to see megaliths, so, like, I didn't think I was gonna be blown away by a cathedral. When I saw this thing, I was dumbstruck at
Hmm.
the scale. I was dumbstruck at the scale. This thing was so massive, and I guess it is the largest spire in England. This thing was so massive, I was stopped in my tracks, and again, it brought me to these thoughts of this old world architecture that might not be as, megalithic, but how in the world are we not building anything like this, um, that inspires? And in fact, in that cathedral, there was a quote that, I took a picture of, and it said something about this cathedral was constructed to make even the worst of pagans wanna worship or
Oh,
something
really?
like that. The point is it was meant to inspire and just
Yeah. Hmm.
dumbstruck you. You walk around, especially out here on the West Coast. Over there on the East Coast, you guys still have some cool old stuff in Virginia
Hmm.
and South Carolina. Over here, we have nothing like that. We have nothing that's old and even compares to what you've got on the East Coast, and it's crazy. You, like, go see these buildings that were built in the '60s and the '70s, and it's like it was built to do the reverse,
Yeah.
to depress you, right?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, I saw years ago before I woke up. I saw a very interesting video about architecture, and it was basically just saying like what you described is that when you see certain types of buildings, there's something about them. I mean, it's funny, like even like the feeling we get, and I don't know if this will sound kind of new agey, but it's like, like they talk about like the acoustics and the vibrations and the frequencies of these places, and you feel a certain way. You know, obviously a visual thing too. Isn't funny when you see like the dystopian futures. A lot of times you see like these blocks and just like stains and stuff. Well, that's what they built after World War One or after World War Two. After they kind of rebuilt lots of these places, they built this style called brutalism, where it literally is like it oppresses like the human spirit. And then you see a place like again, you're going through like a place in England or maybe like something like a city like Paris, and there's something about it like saying, "Wow, we're capable of so much more than we are." And then you see these state buildings, almost like what you imagine be like East Berlin back before the wall fell down. Of like, this is supposed to make me feel bad. It's supposed to make me feel oppressed, and it does. And it's like
Yeah,
that when you see like nice architecture, people want to restore those places and they want to make them nice. Like people gentrify certain parts, old buildings, because they have nice style to them. They have these features that they don't build them like they used to. And then you have things that were built like in the 60s. There's water stains. They look like garbage. And then people treat other people like garbage in these places. Everybody lives in these apartment buildings, these blocks, and it just looks ugly. And again, people's behavior is ugly in those places versus a place that looks classic and people want to aspire to be better. I thought about
yeah,
that and I'm like, you know what? I never really could understand why I felt a certain way, but it all made sense in that way that if you have an oppressive regime, they build these, because it's like everybody knows what looks good. Everyone they'll try to say now, oh, this is subjective, but it's like, you know what looks good and what doesn't. I'm sure that everybody who's gone to like Washington D.C. is impressed with the architecture. Go see
Right.
something new they built there. It looks like, like everybody
Yeah.
would objectively say that looks like garbage. And the funny thing I was thinking, I was literally just in Raleigh, North Carolina, and that's not obviously like DC, but it is to a certain extent. It's a much smaller version of it. And I thought, like, as somebody like me who's skeptical of things, all I want is some kind of an explanation. I want them to mention it. I want them to mention that they used to build better things, but they never, like you never get anybody in public admit that in the 1800s, for some reason, they built better things than we do today. Like if there was a reason why they could, and if anybody says money, we know they got the money printing machine and they build whatever they want. They don't mind throwing money down a hole these days. Back then, there was no Federal Reserve where they could not have just printed money. So they actually had to do it with whatever. I mean, we're told, basically being more technologically advanced, we should be able to build the same things cheaper and faster. But that's not the case. And then that's when you really start to see how stupid some of this stuff is, when you see the 1-year timelines on these buildings. Like they built even like the Empire State Building, which is funny. To go back to what I was saying, Fort Jefferson, 16 million bricks. There's 10 million bricks in the Empire State Building. So just think, for scale wise, like to think about that.
Wow.
So we're told that they built the Empire State Building in 1 year. How? Like, how could they do that back in, like, I think it was like 1931 or something like that, like right around 1930. Like, how could they do that in 1 year then? And then you would imagine them, like, everybody knows. Have you ever seen them do road work in your town? How long does it take for them to fix roads? Why? Why does it take so long to do that stuff? I mean, it's like we've regressed in some kind of way. And that's why I said that's what leads me to believe that there was a peak of civilization at some point, and we're not there. We're on the downside of it, because it feels like we're living in a place that was once better than this. That people were like, people were inspired to do these kind of things, and I think the only thing that makes sense is there must be something that this left out of the story.
Didn't you do a video about a dam in Las Vegas area?
Oh yeah,
Hoover Dam. Go down that rabbit hole real quick.
Well, that was funny. That was one of my first big videos, and it was like I literally was kind of on this kind of Art Deco kind of like, this is weird, all this symbolism here with all this angels and Greek gods and all this weird stuff. And I remember when I first saw that, I was like, man, it's really weird that they got those angels on that dam. Like, what is that? Like, again, you think about it, like, so this is like during the Great Depression. They decided to put these elaborate statues. If you guys have never been there, there's a memorial over at the Hoover Dam. And yeah, I affectionately call them the Dam Angels. And so they're sitting on these blocks over at the Hoover Dam. Here's the crazy thing: the stats on the Hoover Dam is that, like, this is like, it's got like more concrete than almost any place other than like one of the Great Pyramids. It's like how much weight and all this stuff. And I think Oscar James Hansen, the guy who was the sculptor who created the angels, he compared it to the Great Pyramid. Interesting. I just think it's interesting because a lot of people question, what were the pyramids used for? Well, this guy's talking about a hydroelectric dam, and he's comparing it to the pyramids. Maybe that's the correlation. Maybe the Great Pyramids for energy, as this thing is. So that being said, so what we're taught is that over 100 people lost their lives when they were building this dam. And that's when I was going down this rabbit hole, and it was funny because, like, I was doing all these videos about like symbolism and architecture, and somebody said, do the Hoover Dam. And I was like, well, the angels are weird, but I don't really know what it means. And so it was funny, like, literally my video was kind of about, like, I was literally, as I was making the video, I was kind of figuring it out. I was like, oh, let's do a little detective work. So did you guys know these angels are here? Let's see if we can figure out why. So they have this star map in front of them, very Freemasonry looking, kind of symbols on it. And they have like the constellations. And it turns out the star map actually was put there almost kind of like in the way that the Great Pyramids and things like that. They would have these astronomical markers where you could actually literally, somebody could say, based on the alignment of the stars at that time, when it was built to the hour. I think it was dedicated on September 30th, in 1936, I believe, at 9:30 a.m. Like literally, it says that on the map. And so, of course, it's got all of the constellations and stuff. It's got this one symbol called Thuban, and Thuban is like from the Draco constellation. Thuban is a Arabic word that means large serpent or dragon. And of course, I'm connecting. I'm like, oh, what are large serpents, dragons, and angels? You guys making any connections here? You know, of course, as a Christian, you're like, there's one angel that was called the dragon. He was called the serpent. And the crazy part, so as I was going down, I was connecting all these symbols. There's this memorial plaque there that says that it's showing this guy and he's doing like this, and he's got wheat over his hands, and he's kind of in the water, and it says they died to make the desert bloom. And of course, at that time, I'm like, that's a weird phrase. Like, okay, so people died building this dam. But as somebody, as I mentioned, I'm in construction. I've worked on projects where people died. Nobody would ever we would never talk about them like that. Like they had to die or this wouldn't get built. You know, like that's a separate tragedy. It's like we do our best so nobody dies and we could still build the things. You know, that's different. But when you say they died to make the desert bloom, and I'm like, that's weird because like there's not even anything really blooming around there. It's like, you guys ever been to the Hoover Dam? It's pretty bleak around there. The only thing that probably bloomed was maybe Sin City. And then I started to think like, it sounds like a sacrificial thing. You know, there's all this symbolism. They literally dedicated, I think, the dam, the dam, I want to say it opened, or the angels were finished during like Saturnalia. There's these black cubes they're sitting on. It seems like there's this imagery to Saturn there. Saturnalia, they sacrifice people to the god of agriculture, which again, he's doing like this thing here. He's got wheat over his hands. Like I said, do they make wheat around Las Vegas? I mean, like, if they do, I didn't know it. I mean, like, I don't think it's known for that. And I started to think like, yeah, there's so much weird stuff about the Hoover Dam. Like, why is this something that's always pops up in movies like the Transformers? It was like in the new Westworld movie, you know, like, and interestingly enough, in the Transformers, where like they're hiding Megatron under the dam, which is funny because you have angels up there. Megatron is very similar to like the book of Enoch. I think third Enoch, it mentions Enoch becomes Metatron, which is like an angel, the angel of death. He's like the head angel. You got Megatron there. Supposedly they're like reverse engineering him to get technology out of him. There's just something, I don't know what it is. And I said, I had so many videos talking about the Hoover Dam where it's like, there's something more happening at this place than just a hydroelectric dam. Even I finally just visited there, and unfortunately they actually supposedly they had to get rid of the star map, or they had to demo it and they were going to redo it because of like water damage. Now they don't even know anybody who can do it. Like literally they just jackhammered this thing up, threw it in a dumpster, and now they're not sure if they can finish it or not. And I'm starting to wonder like, wow, maybe they're trying to like, you know, in the same way, it's funny how with the Georgia Guidestones just got destroyed supposedly by like terrorists or something. And now they, you know, obviously they're never going to put those back. And some people might say that's a good thing because I don't think they represented anything good. But it's interesting, like that the star map does kind of point to something else being there. Maybe it's something more significant. And if they don't ever build it back, it does seem kind of like in the same way they demo a lot of these old buildings and remove statues. And it's like, are they trying to kind of like erase parts of history to potentially tell us a different, tell future generations a different history?
Sounds like you're saying, were these sites like the Hoover Dam, like the Star Fort, Fort Jefferson, were they repurposed or even, rebuilt on top of far older ancient sites that might have been on ley lines, that might have, because that's kind of what I think of when I think of that Fort Jefferson again, way out in the middle of nowhere. Why that spot?
Mm-hmm.
Was that some kind of ley line that the ancients knew of? Was there something there? And did they build a later civilization build on top of it? Again, that's the common theme we see in Peru, we see in Egypt. We see the dynastic Egyptians, I believe, building on top of older ancient temples. We see the Inca building. You go to Machu Picchu, and literally you'll see small rough stone and clay mortar construction built on top of megalithic structures. Megalithic structures go up about 4 feet,
Mm-hmm.
and then all these buildings, it's just like you see the small rough stone on top. It's like that's two completely different things.
Yeah, you can tell.
Somebody built on top of the older, and if it was the Inca, why didn't they build the whole thing out of the impenetrable, indestructible style, right?
It's
It was
it's so obvious when you ask that question. You know why? Because they didn't. Like,
right.
but it's interesting that I just learned this factoid out just real recently. A good way to cover up stuff would be submerge them. And of course, when you actually look at, like, as you mentioned, so when they created the Hoover Dam, they created Lake Mead. And I can't remember. I once knew all the figures of it, but so much has been submerged by Lake Mead. And I learned there was a city, an Anasazi city. So the ancient Anasazi were natives to this land supposedly, and were the Pueblo Indians and the Hopi Indians claimed to be related to them in some way. They're the ancestors. But the funny part, it was like when I actually learned what Anasazi meant, it just means ancient ones. And so who are the ancient ones? Well, nobody really knows. We just know they lived a time before here. And so when I know what everybody's picturing in their brains when they're saying there was a city under there, they're thinking like, oh, you're thinking of like mud huts and stuff like that. Well, if you go to the lakemead.gov site, it literally says that they had structures with up to 100 rooms in them. Okay, so now maybe you're picturing something different. Like, that's not a primitive society. That seems like an advanced. 100 rooms? That's a building. That's a big building. And so that's under Lake Mead. And then you think about like all the stuff, even like I think they say like even now there's 250-ish, I think, sites attributed to the Anasazi. Now here's the crazy thing is, if you look up the stats, and I can't remember exactly what the stat worldwide was, but there's like 91,000 dams in the world. Like 90,800 of them are in America. It's like literally there's over 90,000 dams in America. So you think about it. Obviously, you have all these artificial lakes. What are they covering up? The answer is lots of stuff, but what are they covering up? Like I said, I gave you an example. There was an ancient city that was covered up. So what else is covered up by these lakes?
You
I mean, like
mentioned
there's literally no telling what they're covering up. I mean, because like I said again, like especially when you find out how deep these lakes are after, because like literally they're flooding out these valleys that are between mountains. I think they say like even now there's been all this talk about this worry of that Lake Mead was drying up. Yeah, it's because it was dropping under 1,000 feet by the dam. So it's like it's still really deep. I mean, that's like how deep is the stuff that's really submerged? The answer is really, really deep, and like you couldn't even find. We couldn't find out what's under there.
You mentioned the Anasazi, the ancient ones. It's crazy looking at some of the artifacts pulled out of a lot of these ancient mounds in Ohio, in Florida, in Alabama, Arkansas. If you took these artifacts and you told somebody where's this from, they'd say that's a Mayan artifact. I mean, it looks that crazy. Artifacts pulled out of mounds in Ohio that look like they're straight out of Mexico. We're almost out of time. I want to ask you about one more site. You had a video about this. It was very intriguing, and that was, I think it was called Camp Hero. And
The stuff about Stranger Things.
yeah, you were talking about the Stranger Things series and how were they actually getting their idea from this other actual site called Camp Hero. So tell us about Camp Hero. And I mentioned portals. So tell us why you think this might have been a portal.
Okay, so a good maybe reference point here is like, so you sometimes you might have to think in your mind, like block out that idea of what you've been shown like in movies like Stargate. Like, so you think about, like, I know a lot of people are thinking like CERN. You have this big old thing and you could imagine it looking like a Stargate. But what I'm thinking, like, that maybe portals are a little different. It's more of a spiritual thing, like literally doorways that we might not be able to visualize in the way that you and I can visualize them. But so I got asked a question on my live stream the one day about Stranger Things. What do you think about that show? And I said, I think that show shows you a lot of real things. And I said, the crazy part about that show is a lot of people don't realize it's based on a true story. So, of course, I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying the show's facts. I'm saying like that I do believe in a spiritual world. And I believe that when they showed the Upside Down, there is obviously a spiritual world that's like, it's running parallel to here. It's almost like an alternative dimension, that those beings can interact, and there's a veil that where sometimes it's thin, and there's ways to pierce that, and we can interact with that, and they can interact with us. So the interesting part about that, they were originally, I think, going to call that show, I think they were going to call it Montauk, because Camp Hero is a real place. It's a former Air Force base in Montauk, New York. And at this place, they were literally doing all kinds of crazy experiments on kids, on animals. Like literally, they were kind of like that story of 11 in that show. Is they were basically abusing children, doing weird things with them. They were trying to get them to astral project and all this stuff. And then, so like, if you could get somebody to astral project, if you believe in that sort of thing, which I do, I believe that is, if you could imagine your consciousness, your soul, like leaving your body and going somewhere else, it's like, I think that's showing you like you're kind of going into this spiritual dimension. And maybe that's the kind of portal thing. Now, the scary part is that like, if you could go do that, the beings on the other side could likely come through too. So what this fantasy element of the show probably is showing you, like that there's this wall where you literally see things that could come straight out of the wall. Like, I don't think it would probably works like that, but I think that there is definitely something happening there where the things they're showing you in the show, like literally, I think it was like Bill Clinton gave some speech, and he doesn't specifically name it, but he's literally like apologizing for things the government was caught doing in some of these places, like using radiation experiments on people. And again, like the weird stuff with the kids, like these black sites, like these 3-letter agencies are doing weird things. And of course, what's the truth about that? Well, I don't think we're ever going to get the full story about what they were actually doing, but it's similar in the way that there's stories about Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was, the guy who was credited with creating JPL, which is like the things that power NASA's rockets. And he was like from like it's funny, like you think about the story of like Iron Man and like Tony Stark, his dad's named Howard Stark. If you see like those Marvel shows, that guy's obviously patterned after Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons got the little mustache. He's got the slick back hair. He looks just like a Stark, or the Starks look just like him. And so he's credited with not only being a rocket scientist with no formal training, but what he was actually doing was he was like literally a Thelemite, who, if you don't know what that is, that's Aleister Crowley started this branch of like this Satanism, basically. And he was the Ordo Templis, something like that. They were basically a Thelema. And so like a Thelema was like a disciple of Aleister Crowley. And they were doing this thing called the Babylon Working, where they were trying to open up a portal to summon the Whore of Babylon. Now, that sounds like a conspiracy there until you look it up. And supposedly they were trying to open a portal through sun worship and all kinds of weird stuff. Like that happened. I mean, was the portal opened up? I don't know. I mean, of course, people, some people say yes, some people say no, but I think that there is obviously something more where it's like that whole, you guys remember that first Thor movie when Thor is telling the one scientist, it's like, your ancestors called it magic, you call it science. He's like, where I come from, again, the thunder gods telling him they're one and the same. And so like the science is basically magic explained, because if I never told you how I did the trick, it's magic. If I explain it to you, it's a scientific process. But I think that what they don't tell you is that at these black sites, they are one and the same. They're doing weird ritualistic things in order to get science. And that's what people wonder. It's like, so is that what they're doing over at CERN when they have literally, it's built on the temple. You know, like the property is where the Temple of Apollyon was. Apollo. They got a Shiva statue. They do weird ritualistic things there with like even like with the Gothard Tunnel right there, where they have the most bizarre opening ceremony. They have like Dark Matter Day there, literally on October 31st, when the veil's the thinnest. Like all the weird things that they do, and you're like, well, that's weird if this is a scientific place. But again, there's examples of this all over the place. Is that how you really contact the other dimension, the other side?
Yeah, if it was just a boring scientific machine that was, trying to slam particles together, why in the world do they have all the symbolism of this occult world?
Yeah.
Shiva, the god destroyer, massive statue out front. But then, yeah, even that ceremony that you just referenced that was, on video, what were they reenacting in that?
The Gothard Tunnel one. I mean, obviously they have some kind of goat thing, and again, it's like that. I believe that biblically, and I think like the Book of Enoch and stuff like that will back this up. Is like that. Like I think that goat deity is like, is that Cernunnos? It's like Cernunnos is likely almost he's kind of a parallel version of Pan. So Pan's the kind of like the goat demon in like the Greek and Roman mythology. And then you have like biblically, you have Azazel who's associated. He's like the scapegoat. He's literally mentioned in the book of Leviticus. And then at CERN, you have like kind of in that part of Europe, they had a being called Cernunnos, and he's basically the exact same, except for he's like a deer. Like that's the only difference is like that instead of a goat, it's a deer.
Yeah.
And you're like thinking like, is that why it's called CERN? Is it because of Cernunnos? And I think the answer is yes, because the things they did, again, like we're kind of taught like after the Age of Enlightenment, they realized all this mythology and religion was all made up. Well, why would a scientist ever want to be associated with that weird stuff? Again, I always ask the same question about NASA. It's like, well, okay, so why don't they name their rockets after the Apostle Paul? They're going to name it after Artemis and Apollo. Like, why? If we're kind of like Western cultures, kind of Christian, I think most people would admit. They wouldn't like to admit it, but it's true. So, like, why wouldn't they name it after Moses or somebody like him? Then name it after Saturn or some kind of other. In case you guys didn't know, all the planets are named after deities from other religions. So it's like, why is there this association? Because you think if I was an atheist, I would want to have anything to do with religious symbols, real or false, like the way you view them. But for some reason they do, and I think it's a good example of they're not telling you the full truth about this stuff.
Interesting. Well, JT, thanks for your time. How can people follow you? I know we kind of already talked about your channels, but give us the official websites. Tell us where they can watch your documentary film also and follow you on social media.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that if you like the kind of long form stuff, yeah, check me out on YouTube. JT Follows JC. That's pretty much how I go on every social media app. I'm Joe Telford on Facebook if you want to follow me there. If you follow me on pretty much anything, you can find a link tree. You see all the links. But yeah, I mean, I know that if you guys like Derek, which I know you do because you're listening to this, he talks about megaliths and giants and angels and all that weird stuff. So I did a documentary, like I said, as I was curious about ancient aliens, I basically gave the counterpoint of view of like, the gods were the sons of God. And we did a movie called Ancient Angels. You can see that at ancientangelsmovie.com. And so, yeah, we talk about megaliths, giants, all the weird things that were the hidden history, true history. And yeah, so if you guys find me, that's basically kind of what I like to talk about. I know that Derek and I don't talk about the exact same things, but we're interested in the same things, I believe.
Well, man, thanks again for your time. This has been a great, insightful interview, and we'll do this again in the future. Sound good?
Absolutely. Of course, I'd love to do it.